to Colony, the official podcast. I'm your host, Tara Bennett, a senior producer for SYFY WIRE. And this week, we have episode 3.10, Sea Spray. And with us, as always, are the gentlemen that are the creators of all that we watch week after week. Co-creator and executive producer Ryan Condal.
Hi.
And executive producer Wes Tooke. Hello, sir.
Nice to be here.
Wes is thrilled.
He's super excited.
That's his excited face.
That is. It is. He's just beaming right now. It's absolutely wonderful.
You should see it when he doesn't like you.
But we're also super, super excited to welcome back to the podcast the man behind the Bram, actor Alex Neustaedter. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's so great to have you. It's been quite the season for you and for your character. So we are so happy to have you here to dig into all of the things that have been going on with your character. But we're going to start, as we usually do, just talking about the cold open. And Ryan, nice to see that you got your metal needle drop for this season.
Yeah.
Did you have a list? What's my budget? What can I put in? Or was there a metal intention?
The only reason I was ever interested in making any television was just to really get Metallica in the show. Right. And I've worked now for 33 episodes with that pursuit. I pitched it in the first season, and after our post-producer had regained consciousness from laughing, he informed me how artist rate structures work. Mm-hmm. And how the song that I proposed was more than the entire season's budget of music rights, and that I should rethink my approach.
Did you create a cuss jar to pay for it?
No, 3 seasons of bake sales. The number of brownies I bought on behalf of that stupid song, I cannot tell you.
Yeah, but the dedication that Wes has to my brownies are it's really appreciated. That's really brings a tear to my eye.
They're not just out of the box. I mean,
what's in those brownies?
Well, yeah.
Bourbon. We're bourbon people.
Subject to another podcast. But yes, I am a Metallica fan, mm-hmm. and we don't do a lot of needle drop work on the show because anything that you hear is source sound, so it's never done stylistically. And so if you do hear a song, the characters in the scene are also hearing it. And there's a scene where a character was going into a very testosterone-soaked gym, mm-hmm. and it just felt right. So I pitched it again to Rauf, our post-producer, and he said, actually, we haven't spent any money this year at all on needle drops, so we do have a bunch of money. And then I went and I found a B-side that Metallica does not license out a lot. He told me they say no to everything very quickly, so we'll know within basically 24 hours. And he sent the email, and I think 8 hours later got a yes, because it was a song that nobody ever asked for. Everybody's always asking for Enter Sandman,
right, of course,
Master of Puppets and stuff like that. But this is a little song from Master of Puppets, the album, 1986, and the last album that Cliff Burton, their dear departed bassist, recorded on, called Disposable Heroes. And it just felt right. The whole thing just felt very right.
I wish everyone could have been there for the sound mix when it played, and I looked over, and I hadn't seen Ryan smile in 2.5 years. Not even the birth of his child. And it's like the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day. He was so happy.
It did. I was on such a high, I fired 3 people after that.
The king had his moment.
Yeah.
But that leads into the setup for us understanding that there are some people talking amongst themselves about what's going on in the block and these outliers.
We've established that there are other outlier groups in the block. We're interested in general in these teasers and expanding the world, mm-hmm. and taking us outside the POV of our core characters. And you suddenly realize you're among what could be a truly meaningful resistance group. The twist at the end of the teaser is that they are potentially controlled by Kinds. So hopefully, as you watch the episode of that in the back of your head, as our group comes ever closer to crashing into this resistance group, you are curious about whether or not this is a good or bad thing.
Let's talk about the Bram of it all this season, because a lot happens in this episode, but a lot has already happened to Bram.
I think a lot of it was there on the page for me, more so than it was me having to conceptualize it. I mean, there was a 6-month gap of time between when we left LA to when we pick up the show again. And so I was talking to Tim, one of our directors, mm-hmm. and he was just giving me an outline of where his mind space was. But 6 months in the middle of nowhere, not really knowing what you're doing, and mm-hmm. that can definitely get to anybody. And I feel like Bram, especially because of what has transpired the past season and what's been going on, like he needs to have something happen and he needs to take action into his own hands. So I think that was kind of what I was trying to play most starting it out, and just the fact that he's grown up a bit and matured and had to deal with his own issues on his own and work together with his family a bit and try and understand how he fits in it. I mean, I think ultimately he wanted to be somewhere where there's other people and their ideas kind of align, and I don't know if he really ever fully knew what their ideas were because he was kind of put on the back burner a bit by his parents episodes. But I do think he was excited to go and do something new and try something out. In hindsight, probably, you know, it may not have been the best move ultimately if you're just looking back on it, but you don't really know when you're in it. And something new, I think, in a good change of pace, I think he was thrilled to do it and be there.
Did you have a favorite either scene or moment that you played within those first episodes, just in terms of you feeling like it opened up the character a little bit for you or even allowed you to play a different beat than maybe you'd played in the first 2 seasons?
I just feel like the relationship Bram had with his parents this season was just different from the first episode, from the get-go. And I think that opens up a lot more in terms of like how he's matured and where they see him, you know, and listening to him and understanding his perspective and kind of taking that in. And I think that opens up a lot in terms of Bram's confidence and where he wants to go and that he has a say ultimately and that he's part of the family.
I think we need to take a moment to acknowledge also the scene in 305, the Russian roulette scene, which I think was, it's a hard scene to play because there are versions of that sort of thing out there and it can tend towards melodrama. But I mean, my God, man, you crushed that. So that was an excellent scene.
It really was.
Thanks.
Alex told me he actually thought that Bram was going to kill him in the scene, so he was able to draw on that.
I didn't have to do much, man. I really didn't have to do.
There's a reason we did not give him a sword.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually
better off with a prop gun.
When he came to set that day in his kilt, I thought we might be in a little bit of danger.
We're losing an actor today.
Yeah,
hopefully an extra.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it was just great, and I was actually there on set that day when that was being shot. Filmed. And I just love the little moments that Alex brought to the scene where he chose to brazenly stare McGregor in the face and you know, basically telling him, like, you're going to kill me. You have to look me in the eye while you do it. And the subtle little looks between him and his father were, again, like, as Wes was saying, trying to stay away from falling into melodrama, but feeling like this is a real dramatic scene with actual stakes. And we had obviously set up through the course of the show that this is something that the audience would believe could happen. I mean, I don't think anybody would have been shocked in that moment, really shocked if McGregor had pulled the trigger on Bram. Because we've established this is a dangerous world. So you feel the tension, you feel the reality of that scene, but you also feel the desperation of a father to preserve his son, and Alex playing the role of a teenager who has been forced to mature well beyond his years, trying to face death in a brave way where he's going to go out with his boots on in a way. I mean, it's an incredible sequence at the end of an incredible arc of episodes. I mean, I just can't say enough good things about Alex as an actor and the way he's matured, not only into the role of Bram, but just as a young man and a young actor. He's wonderful to work with.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. That's very sweet.
You can. That's my one compliment for the day.
Awesome.
So,
that's all I need. Thanks.
I'm just going to be really mean to Wes for the rest of this podcast.
How is that going to be different from previous podcasts?
That's right.
The thing about that scene in 305, as I try to return to the subject, is that it's also kind of a waypoint scene for Bram in that we've seen him standing on that loading dock in season 2 where there was a gun potentially pointed at his head and the way that he dealt with it there. And it's just a reminder that in this world, you're aging in dog years. And that in the world we live in right now, you can be 18 years old and not responsible for anything. But we are putting a huge responsibility on Bram. And there's a kind of a handoff, almost a responsibility in episode 6, which Bram takes very seriously and takes onto his shoulders, which is the responsibility for his sister. Yes. And that relationship to me has been one of the most interesting and special parts of the season as you realize these are two kids who kind of intuitively understand that their parents are broken in a way that no longer allows them to play a key parental role. And you have an 18-year-old who has decided to try and step up and fill the void. When you think about where Bram started in season 1, which is kind of a prototypic teenager trying to figure out the rules of this world, but really living under the rules of the prior one, and then going in and being hardened by that, the first camp, and then approaching the second camp really as truly a young adult, and then having it end so badly that now you know he really is, in a weird way, he's kind of the patriarch of this weird family.
He has. It's shifted into that role, which is surprising and heartbreaking at the same time.
And has dealt with the damage and the trauma better than his parents have.
Yeah.
And watching the way that Alex chooses to play differing attitude toward his mother and father in these various scenes is also really telling. And we chose to hide something from the audience, which is the extent to which off-screen he's been collaborating with his dad. And once you know that, once that comes through in the scenes, I think it's really helpful and actually really enjoyable to go back and watch these scenes again and view the way that Alex is playing them.
Alex, I wanted to ask that moment when Katie says to you, whatever ends up happening, you have to take care of Gracie. And so as an actor, so much hits you so quickly for you to just process as a human being, an actor, losing a cast member, but then also all of that impacts how you play Bram.
Yeah, it does. I mean, when you have a loss like that, I mean, I haven't really had any huge losses in my own life, but I can imagine, and that's what I was playing, completely losing a little brother, how deep that must root inside you. It's a lot to handle, and especially like right after when you have to take care of your sister and you have to continue to move forward. It's a really tough place to be. So I think Bram took it in a way where there's no other option for him except to man up and to know what he needs to do to take care of his family. And as much as he's feeling that, he needs to push it down. But playing it, I credit a lot to our writers and the two sitting next to me right now, because it's a lot harder, I feel like, to write it than it is to act it, to be honest. And I was just following their cues, and that's just kind of how I did it, and what it was in the moment for me and what it would be in the moment for this kid who was dealing with these circumstances. I mean, they're kind of unworldly circumstances to think about in this world we're in right now, but if you go back in it, that's all you have and that's all you know. So playing it just in that like mind space makes it much simpler, if you will. And so you're just living with it, and it's day by day. Another big thing that dawned on me quite a bit was the relationship I had with Gracie and the relationship my parents had with me. I think Bram realizes earlier on, like, how he's treating his sister is similar to how his parents might have been treating him, and for him to learn how to switch that and treat her as an adult and see that she's growing on her own. I think that's something that's really empowering for Gracie as well, to know that she belongs here too, because she doesn't know and she doesn't have the perspective that I do, let alone my parents. So I think trying to play that and trying to have that growth throughout was really important. But yeah, it was amazing, and Isabel is amazing to work with, and just such a sweet human being. So it was a great time.
I feel like there's a specific moment where you can watch it shift, which is in that scene where you guys are walking down the hill and you say, "What girlfriend?"
Yeah.
And she just stares at you and you kind of process it, and then you decide to answer the question. And it's like from that moment forward there, they have an adult conversation.
Yeah.
It's almost like a nod of acknowledgement. It's a really special moment.
Definitely. So let's talk about the last episode, which was directed by Sarah. And it's an intense episode just for the interrogation scene alone with Will and Snyder. And then to have that confrontation between Bram and Will. You admit to him that you've killed. You've never really had that kind of a moment with Josh in that kind of intensity in the series before.
No, I don't think so. I think that day it was a bit emotional, but it was also, sometimes those days are, I wouldn't say easier, but once you let yourself get in it, it can kind of just come out much easier, and you don't really think about what else is going on except for the moment. But yeah, it was a lot. It's being disappointed with your father and revealing how you truly feel about just your own personal self and your life and what's going on. It's a lot to handle. I mean, I have had conversations like this a little bit with my dad, not heated, but it's really hard to open up sometimes to your father, which I've found to be true. And when that happens, I just remember how intense it was, and playing with Josh. And I think it's the most real we've really had in a scene, and it was incredible. It felt amazing. That's what I remember.
It's such a culmination. It's also a reverse of the parent-child role, because in that scene, Alex is playing the role of the adult. The dynamic came so naturally between them, where I was talking earlier about how you're watching Will in this incredibly tragic fall, where in a different show it would feel like this vengeance ride by Clint Eastwood, but instead it feels like this almost pathetic place that the character has to go to in order to maybe either fall into the abyss or pull himself back from it.
Yeah.
Will, the man, realizes in that scene when he's confronted by his 19-year-old son that, oh my God, what have I done? And he's actually, in a way, being kind of lectured by his kid about, don't tell me the things that I've been through. Let me tell you the things that I've been through. You pulled me into this. What are you doing?
Right.
It was a fascinating scene to break, and then to write with Carlos, the writer, on the script, and then to shoot and to see it all come together, because it's an interesting spin on what would be the expected trope of that situation or that scene.
And it's hard to edit too, because you have to calibrate it within the rest of the show. We're coming off this incredibly intense scene with Snyder. Fortunately, Josh and Alex gave us several options in the scene. You know, the question is, how does it get physical? How emotional does it get? And you have to look at it holistically. If that scene were in a different episode where it is the central dramatic scene and the most intense scene of the entire episode, you probably can treat it slightly differently. But in the wake of having gone through an emotional ringer already, you have to think about, as a viewer, where are you ready to go? Fortunately, all the performances they delivered, whether they became physical or they didn't, there's emotional truth there, so you could have used any of them.
Yeah, and it plays out almost as an epilogue to the second act of really Will's relationship with Snyder, and the Bowman's relationship with Snyder has now come to a close. And this is the epilogue of that story that's going to lead us into the next phase. Not necessarily vis-a-vis their relationship with Snyder, but really Bram's relationship with his father, Will's relationship with his children, with his family, with his own psychological state.
Yeah.
This is the beginning of the next part of that, and you're hoping that Will is woken up a little bit.
And there's a great moment in this episode in particular where he's trying to make breakfast for the family, and and Alex, you come into the room looking at him like, have you lost your mind trying to act like everything's okay? Like
the bacon's burning.
Yeah, the bacon's burning. And just you look at him like, dude, no. Coming out of a big confrontation like that, and then in this episode, where's your mindset in terms of what Bram decided in that moment?
I think ultimately for him, that scene was where he finally separates himself from his father. And I think that's another coming of age moment in its own when he knows that his father isn't going to be there for him and tell him everything, and he's going to have to figure it out on his own. So I think that's kind of ultimately what it was for me with that scene. And there's a lot going on. He has a girlfriend here too. He's balancing a lot of these different things in his life, and it's all very, very crucial for him to make the right decisions, I think. But he's still just a kitten. He doesn't fully know. So I think he's, just siding with where he feels most comfortable and who he thinks will show him the right way to be in this new world, and who he ultimately wants to continue to learn from and live with, and how he can still try and find happiness in this place,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a clarity here also that comes from his parents are still caught up in their own questions, right? But this is a family that has paid a true price for a lot of the decisions they've made. And I think for Bram, thinking back on the prices that they've paid, understanding that your parents can make these decisions and there's really nothing you can do about them, but you have to figure out a way to insulate yourself from the consequences.
Right.
More specifically, you have to figure out a way to insulate your sister from the consequences. I think very consciously in the wake of what happens in 9 starts to cast around for what are the options, what are the potential safe landing places.
In Seattle, there is this kind of throwback to what life used to be. And you see that in his choice to have a girlfriend and to not share that with anybody except for Gracie, and to have his family that invites him over for dinner and things like that, which feel like you can make a decision like Katie kind of has to try to dig into, can we be a family? And you're seeing decisions that, can we be a family? But it's not with the family that I walked into Seattle with necessarily. One member of it, but maybe not mom and dad.
Yeah, to play a part in this theater that's been created here, where life is normal and there's an economy and we have jobs and we have families and homes, and we ignore the 300-foot walls surrounding us and the fact that we can't leave the city and all sorts of things like that. I mean, we had paired Bram in the past with these interesting but damaged women.
Right.
In the first season, he finds himself allied with a girl who's basically working a very dangerous black market job as a smuggler, bringing things back and forth. And he lives this very safe life, so he's attracted to the danger of that. And then that danger leads him into a prison camp,
right,
where he meets a terrorist.
Your pick of ladies has been difficult for him.
Murderer, freedom fighter.
Former pirate.
So former pirate as well,
yes.
And he was, again, attracted to that because it broke some with what he knew at home. But in this season, his relationship with Meadow and Sal and their family is an attraction to the normal. We tried to craft this almost Walton-like, creepy normal family that has found a way to stay together and galvanize their familial bond under this extreme pressure of living in the occupation. His father is this surrogate for the way that Bram probably hopes that his own father was. He's working for this more noble, at least as he sees it, police force within the block. He's a Boy Scout. He cooks dinner for his family. And Meadow is, instead of being the dangerous firework in his life, she's actually the rock. This incredible force of stability for him that he finds himself drawn to, but he's also kept things from her. So it's just really interesting how the dynamic has shifted, and Bram is now almost attracted to a woman who is completely the opposite of the women we've seen him attracted to in the past.
Definitely. So let's talk about the Will and the Katie of it with this episode, because now, as we talked about in the beginning with the outliers, we're starting to peel back.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the mythology is really ramping into high gear in this season's story, and we're finding out not only a lot of mysteries that we've carried since the first season, some as far back as the pilot.
Yeah.
But a lot of these other things that we've built towards this season have really come to a head here, and we're going to see 10 as the transitional act that takes us out of the end of the second act of the season, which is episode 9, which ends the emotional arc story between the Bowmans and Snyder, and then begins this next chapter, which is, okay, now that that's settled, what's next for us and what's really going on here in Seattle and what's happening. And as this looming threat of this war that's been promised as a danger that's lurking on the horizon, whether that's true or not, this war between the Raps and whatever this other entity is, and how that's going to affect everybody on the ground. So now it feels like it's building towards that. And through the unraveling of who this man Everett Kynes is and what he's been up to in the colony. All of that underlying mystery and mythology is now going to start falling into line, and this is the beginning of a incredible series of revelations that will come over the next 3 episodes.
You'll note that when Will comes home, however, he tries to figure out a way for them to get on the same page and move forward and figure out something that he's decided they need to figure out. He does not come clean about what has been going on or what he may or may not have involved his son in.
Will, in particular, we approached his character this year, especially after Charlie's death. We approached the character as an addict and looked at him the way his rage or his desire for vengeance was his addiction. And top of the episode where he is poorly making bacon for the family, where Bram kind of gives him what for, is the metaphor for the scene where the addict wakes up after the bender and decides, I've had enough of that whole life. I have this beautiful family in front of me. I have all these things that I'm throwing away. I'm going to pretend like it never happened. I'm going to make it all better. And today is a brand new day, ignoring the damage and the effect that his sickness and his addiction have had on the family around him. So that's that scene, is he's trying to draw himself out of this. He got very close to satisfying this very dark urge of his to enact this violence on Snyder to somehow fill this hole in his soul from losing his son. And now he's trying to pull himself back from that void and figure out what's next. But now, of course, he's stopped drinking, so he's going to now chain smoke a pack of cigarettes. So Will is, in this episode, going through that process of, now that he's let go of the Snyder idea, he's got to focus on something bigger and better that to him is more healthy and more positive place to direct his energy, which is this greater question of the nature of these resistance characters in the block and who and why and what's this list that I'm on and how does that all fit into place. And now that's the thing that he's going to now seek to fill.
Under the guise of keeping your family safe,
right? Ironically, the lie that was true for Will up until this point was the only thing that he cared about was protecting the Bowman clan. And now he continues to trumpet that slogan that he's gotten so much mileage out of, but it's not really true anymore.
No, it's not really true. So we're going to finish up. Let's go into our listener mail segment. Melissa Worcester wants to know, will we see Maddie or Hudson again?
Wes, can you sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow?
I certainly cannot, but that's the right,
I will say that there's a lot of finality that comes in Colony that isn't spelled out, that isn't provided to you in a ham-fisted way. I think there's a lot of genre television, a lot of genre storytelling in our world right now, which is great, but it also conditions audience members to expect a certain transparency, I think, to storytelling versus opacity, which is the world where Wes and I live. And I think the conclusion of Maddie and Hudson's and Nolan's story was communicated very clearly, but it's this very human trait to search for complete closure on everything, and it's just real life doesn't work that way.
And wartime, you don't always get answers. People disappear, and
this is the experience
you will never know
of living in an occupation, in a war zone like this, and the kind of closure that you probably want. Real life doesn't work that way, and neither do we.
Well, Maddie did get on a ship going to the moon. The moon done blown up. She did.
I think we can say on that one, right? That is,
yes, correct.
But it works in both ways. You know,
Thank you, Wes, for the transparency.
Opacity and transparency in that answer. Amazing. Well, I want to thank, as always, Ryan and Wes for you guys being here and giving us all this great insight. And then Alex, an amazing, amazing job this season with Bram. Also, more episodes to come. Your performance and the arc that you've taken him through has just been really stellar to watch. So congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
As always, I want to thank my podcast team, producer Bartley Taylor, producer-editor Paul Terry, mixer and masterer Dave Draper, and Mike Casatini, and the network studios for hosting us. And if you're enjoying the show, please give us a review and subscribe on iTunes. The better rankings we do on that service, it will help Colony's profile. And we want more of your questions for our listener mail segments. Leave them for me via the comment section at the bottom of every weekly podcast post on SYFY WIRE, or reach out to us on Twitter with questions via my handle, @Tara D. Bennett, or #ColonyPodcast. And we hope you come back with us next week.